Okay, welcome back, fellow survivors. This is going to be Lesson 10, the lecture portion of Lesson 10. In this lesson, we're going to expand the power of the if statement that we did in Lesson 9. If you remember from the lab in Lesson 9, we had a little problem with our if statements, putting too much text to the screen. We're going to solve that in this lesson. We're going to see how you can add a couple things to your if statements. We're going to expand upon our knowledge because there's more than just a simple if statement you can do. You can get really kind of complex with your if statements. We're not going to get too complex in this lesson. We're going to expand over the next several lessons with if statements and logic and everything, and stuff like that, stuff that you really need for programming. So let's get to it. In this lesson, we're going to learn about else and else if, because we know that an if statement, if this condition is true, then this block of code executes. But what if the statement is false and we want to do something? Right? We're going to learn how to do that. What if we want to test one condition several different times and take an action each and every time? Well, we can do that with else if. We're going to fix the problem from Lesson 9 that I talked about a few minutes ago. And we're going to talk about efficiencies in our code, because the more efficient your code runs, the faster your program will run. Now, with these simple little programs that we're doing here, it's going to run fast regardless on any modern computer. But as we advance our programming knowledge and stuff, if we remember that efficiency in our code helps speed our programs along. If I have this huge, gigantic program, and I go through it and I can tweak it a little bit to make it more efficient, then it's going to run faster. Alright, the word else. Else is a keyword. Alright, we learned that if an if statement is true, the code executes. But what if we want the code to execute when the statement is false? And what I mean by that is, here's a good example. If true equals false, remember I have the two equal signs for comparison. One equal sign is assignment, two equal signs are comparison. Well, we know that true isn't equal to false, so this statement here, right here, is going to be false. When this statement is false, this block of code does not run. If I have an else block in with my if statement, alright, then the else block executes. I do not have to have an else block, as we saw in Lesson 9. But when I include an else block in here, that block of code is going to execute. Notice how there's no condition next to the word else, because I don't need one. Because if this is true, then do this. Else, you're going to do this. Kind of like when you were a kid, your mom said do this or else, right? Well, that type of thing. Okay, so I have no condition here. You are not to put a condition next to the word else. Never, never, ever, 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 never do it. Okay, it will not work. It will not compile. If it does compile, it'll just throw a logic error into your program that you have to debug later. Notice that there's no semicolon after the word else, like there's no semicolon after the condition in my if statement. Okay, there are semicolons after my cout statements, like we've been doing for the whole course here. I have an open close curly brace for my if block. I have the word else, and I have an open and close curly brace for my else block. Okay, so this is what the word else does for us. If this is true, then this happens. Else, well, then this happens. If, I hit the zombie in the head, he's dead. Else, he's still coming at me. Okay? Let's look at another thing we can do with our else statements, which is called else if. Alright, else if lets us test the same or different data and take a course of action based on the value of the data. Okay, once a test, and what we need to know about the else if block of code, and we're going to see this in the example and in the lab. Once a test evaluates as true, meaning once one condition is met, then the rest of the statement is skipped. Alright, and what I mean by that is it's kind of easier to show you than it is to talk about it. So here's a quick example. I have an integer x that I've set equal to 10. Alright, if x is less than 15, we're going to see out that x is less than 15. Else if x is less than 25, then it's going to see out x is less than 25. If neither one of these conditions is true, then the else block is going to fire off and it's going to output to the screen, I don't know what x is. Now, like I said, once one of these conditions is true, it's going to execute that block of code, and then it's going to break out of that block of code, and it's not going to evaluate it any further. So because x is equal to 10 in this example, this is going to display to the screen. It's not even going to look at this part of the else if, and it's not going to look at the else statement either. It's just going to break completely out of it, and it's going to continue running our program. Alright, now if I make a quick change here, oops, let me go to the previous one, here we go. If I make a quick change here, and in PowerPoint, and if I set x equal to 16, or 20, here, we'll make it equal to 20, we'll just use round numbers here. Alright, now I've set x equal to 20. If x is less than 15, well, x is not less than 15. X is equal to 20 in this new example, so it's not even going to look at that. Else if x is less than 25, well, x is currently less than 25, it's going to execute this block of code here. Alright, and then it's going to break out of it, and it's going to skip the else statement entirely because there's no reason to evaluate that because it found a true statement here. Now, if I go out of my PowerPoint here and I put in 30, there we go. Now x is equal to 30. If x is less than 15, which it's not, so that evaluates as false. Else if x is less than 25, which it's not, so that evaluates as false. So it executes the else block and it says cout, I don't know what x is. Our program, we're going to fix our program from lesson 9 to include else statements. Now remember that when there's no zombies, we're going to go ahead. When there's one zombie, we're going to try to take it out quietly. When there's 5 or less zombies, we're going to try to avoid this group. And when there's 6 or more zombies, we're just going to get the heck out of there. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed learning about else and else if statements. You cannot use an else statement by itself. You cannot use an else if statement by itself. You have to have an if statement first. Alright, if and else ifs have conditions, else statements do not have conditions. Keep this in mind when you're first doing this. It can get real hairy real quick, and then you have to debug your code. So pay attention to what you're doing to begin with, and it will narrow down the number of errors that you have in your code. Alright, I'll see you in the lab portion for this lesson. Thanks for viewing.